Now, ever since AMD teased their Ashes of Singularity benchmark showing that two of these guys at just under 2/3 the price of a single GTX 1080 Founders Edition was actually beating it. So obviously people have ran with that, saying that that means that two of these are better than a 1080 in pretty much every instance. Well, let's go ahead and find out today on whether or not that's true, because fortunately I've now got my hand on two of these little beasts.
What are you doing?
I just thought it was time for an upgrade.
That's Little Jay's Xbox.
Ah, much better.
How did you even get in here?
Just made a key last time I was here, no big deal. Really could go for a drink right about now, though.
I kind of feel like you've already done this whole living room thing before.
No, there's a different channel. These are horrible, man.
Well, you are breaking and entering.
No, I'm not. I have witnesses.
The new Define Nano S from Fractal Design supports full-size power supplies, full-length graphics cards, room for a complete custom water loop, and heck, even room for a couple of freeloaders. Click the link in the description for more details. Fractal Josh, not included.
We should order pizza.
Now, a couple things to kind of get out of the way here. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to Ed over at TechSource for sending me his RX480, because as you guys know, we were all sent one of these, and that kind of made a lot of people in the public really like, what the heck, man? AMD showed these Crossfire results and they didn't send anybody two cards, and that means we couldn't test it. So I reached out, Ed responded, and pretty much right away, he responded immediately saying, hey man, you can borrow my card. So I was like, sure, absolutely. So do me a favor, guys, look in the description, check out the link to his channel, check out his RX480 review. He's also going to be doing a Crossfire review, because I'll be sending him my card in exchange, for scratch my back, because that itch is, it's been itching for a while and I couldn't reach it, and he got that for me because, he's a bro. So anyway, I'm going to send him my card and you guys can see the same results over on his channel as well. The other thing to mention here is there's obviously been a lot of controversy, especially on Reddit over the last couple of days, about power consumption on this guy and PCIe SIG standards and whether or not it's pulling too much power through the motherboard. I'm not going to comment on that because it's obviously a very deep issue. I don't know obviously a whole lot about it, but there's a lot of controversy saying it's out of spec, and other people are chiming in saying no, it's in spec, and then supposedly PCIe SIG said no, it's fine, there's no problems, there's no issues here, it's not going to damage your motherboard. So I don't know. So I don't even want to comment on that, but I will say that I did not run into any sort of hardware issue with running two of these for, well, 2 days now in Crossfire config. Yeah, I guess Crossfire could be kind of a config if you look at power consumption depending on which card you're using. But anyway, I digress. That's pointless. We're not going to talk about that today because that's just admittedly an issue that's much deeper than my comprehension on the standards for PCIe slot power draw. But I will say that I did not run into any issues while doing my testing. And it also goes to show that apparently if you look at any card's power draw, almost all of them pull more than 75 watts from the PCIe slot. And then if you overclock it, you pull even more than that. So if you've ever overclocked a card, guess what? You've pretty much gone out of standard. So there's that. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get into the results, and then we'll talk about this and whether or not it's even worth to consider doing. That's always the point of these videos. Is it worth it?
Transition.
Okay, so as you guys could see by looking at the benchmarks, these two cards lived just in the shadow of the GTX 1080 Founders Edition and was nipping at its heels the entire time. Now, some people look at that and go, see, there was a lie, it was a lie. No, it wasn't a lie, because they only showed asynchronous compute game like Ashes of the Singularity, which we know AMD is better at. So I didn't actually test that because, again, I don't know how to use the damn benchmark, and I'm willing to admit it. I keep getting extremely sporadic results, sometimes FPS down into the 30s while running 1080p. So again, that's why I didn't want to use the benchmark. It's confusing to me, and I'm too stupid to figure it out. So that's why I just stuck to my usual lineup of like GTA 5 and Crysis and Witcher and Far Cry, and a good mixture of both NVIDIA and AMD titles. Obviously, Firestrike is in there. This thing has the highest score amongst the entire configs I tested in Firestrike. But as you guys know, you can't take a synthetic benchmark like Firestrike and convert it to real-world experience when it comes to games. Synthetic benchmarks don't use nearly as much RAM, they use nearly as much CPU, and they also scale nearly perfectly. But that doesn't mean the developers have scaled it when it comes to the games. So that's why my testing methodology is the way that it is. But also one thing to keep in mind too is, yeah, this thing did not exceed the GTX 1080 in pretty much any of the games that I tried out, but it was right there. It was like literally biting the heels like a rabid chihuahua at the GTX 1080 the entire time, at just under 2/3 the cost. That's the thing that's actually worth mentioning. These come in at $478 in a Crossfire config, $239 MSRP for the 8GB model, nipping at the freaking heels of a GTX 1080 for considerably less, to over $200 less. That's a big deal. You could buy 2 of these for one rig, and another one for another computer for less than it would cost for a single GTX 1080 Founders Edition, and that's kind of a big deal to me. But one other thing to also mention is these were running at stock speeds. So if you overclock these, the extra 100 megahertz they were capable of, then it does go just past the 1080. But if you overclock the 1080 on the flip side, which we all know it's very good at, then it pulls even farther ahead, like way farther ahead. But again, for something that costs more, you would kind of expect it to do better, I would hope. Anyway, one other thing to also mention though, is although these were better than a single 1070 in pretty much every instance, they do cost about $40 to $50 more than a 1070. So that's also something worth keeping in mind. And you're going to use a lot more power because these cards are about 160 watts a piece, just over the 150 TDP they advertise, depending on whether or not it gets to ramp up or fan speed. There are things at play there. So these do consume about twice the amount of power as a GTX 1070, which means more heat in the room and more noise. Now I didn't mention thermals and I didn't mention noise because blower style coolers like this from AMD, they suck. They really do suck. In fact, blower styles in general are loud and they're extremely inefficient at their method of cooling. So we just need to wait for board partner cards to come out with their multi-fan configurations to see how they really stack up, which is nice because that means you have more overclocking headroom with better temperatures, especially on AMD. And that means the acoustics are also going to come down quite a bit. But these sounded like a freaking AC-130 going down the runway when these were under load. They were really loud. But also, too, one thing to keep in mind, my motherboard configuration for Crossfire, instead of having dual slot spacing like that, forced them to be like this. So this card did get up to 85C under load, but it didn't throttle. It stayed at 1266, so that's a good thing. So that really brings us into the portion about whether or not it's worth it. And you've got to ask yourself, what games do you play? Are you primarily an indie gamer? Are you a side scroller? Do you play MOBAs? Do you play games that typically just don't require a lot of demand from your graphics card? If that's true, then 2 of these might not be the best option for you. One of them would be more than sufficient to play games like StarCraft and League of Legends and all of that, with all settings maxed, all the eye candy up, and have a great gaming experience. But that also means you'd never even consider something like a 1080 if that was your gaming expectation anyway. But I am really pleased to see that it scaled very, very well on the AAA titles that I played with. Now, that's not to say, though, that it was completely bug-free. In Crysis 3 on 4K, I was getting some weird textures on the water, with some really weird flickering that was only there in 4K. It wasn't there in 1440, and it wasn't there in 1080, and it was the only game that I had any sort of issue with. But actually, before filming this video, but after doing my testing, I did get notification from AMD that they actually have an updated driver to actually address some Crossfire config stuff and even give a little bit more performance to Crossfire. So we're already seeing drivers pumped out from AMD's camp, which is a good thing because there was always this huge stigma of the AMD drivers suck. And then the next year it's like, oh, the NVIDIA drivers suck. And then the next year it's like, oh, both companies' drivers suck. And AMD was actually pretty bad with going a long time for a while there with no WIGL certified drivers and only dealing with betas and lots of bugs. But it seems like that might be squared away. But at the end of the day, I can't say whether or not this is worth it to you. You're gonna just have to see the benchmarks that are out there, look at everyone doing Crossfire testing, and look at the games they're using, the settings they're using, and try and determine if you can get a better gaming experience versus what you have now with 2 of these. Personally, I would always recommend, if you're on a budget, going with the fastest single card you can get versus any sort of lower end Crossfire config. I never personally recommend going with 2 lower cards in place of a single high end card, because you introduce things like the glitching textures like I just showed you with Crysis, or you deal with driver optimization, or you deal with the devs. Are the devs even going to code for Crossfire? It's one of those things where the single card, you're always supported. But if you're just an enthusiast and you like having multiple graphics cards, you think it looks cool, then that's something you could do too. And are these going to actually be supported for water cooling? That's another thing people ask me. Yes, they are actually. I have EK water blocks on the way right now as we speak, so I can actually do some water cooling testing on this, which is going to be interesting because I also usually never recommend water cooling a graphics card this cheap. I would usually recommend taking the extra $100 the block costs and putting it into a better card. But who knows? Might as well test it since it's on the way. But anyway, guys, tell me what you thought about this. Again, when it comes to the PCIe slot thing, let that one play out. I have no idea. I have no idea the players involved there. I have no idea who even started this rumor or why. I don't think it's going to blow up your motherboard based on what PCIe SIG is saying, that the slots apparently are good for up to 300 watts. And someone was saying that in Tech Talk the other night. But I don't know enough about that standard to say it's going to hurt anything. I didn't experience any issues with running 2 of these and even playing around with overclocking, so who knows? Maybe I'll set up a low-end test rig, like a budget motherboard and a budget CPU, and set it up and just let it run and loop under load and see if anything goes pop and sizzle. I don't think anything will, but maybe that's worth a test. Hit like if you want me to do that test. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and as always, have a great day. Actually, normally I say as always, see you in the next video, but I want you guys to have a great day. Damn it. It's the weekend. Enjoy it. All right, see you in the next one. I just kicked the camera. Amateur hour at its best.